Hey, everybody, it's Ryan. Thanks for downloading today's show. And just a reminder, as always, Wake Up War Chant is brought to you by our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central and Township, in the heart of College Town. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, from Tallahassee to Thomasville and from coast to Atlantic coast, it's time to Wake Up War Chant here on 97.9 ESPN Radio, and it's a very happy Thursday, September the 7th to you and yours. You're currently listening to the voice of Ryan Kelly. I'm the director of digital media at warchant.com. Drew's on the other side of the glass. Drew, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm alive. As you can probably tell by the sound of my voice, I'm not feeling well today. So, good news, bad news. Good news is we do have an extended conversation with Ryan Clark today in anticipation. It was one of those things where I could feel this coming all last night, and it was one of those things where I knew we were going to have Ryan on the show, and Ryan actually has a phenomenal piece coming out today about James Blackman. He's down in Belgrade right now. He's traveling back this morning. He got to talk to a lot of folks from his high school career and his time growing up down there. So that's going to be an awesome read. Make sure you check that out. So we're going to have an extended conversation with him today. But first of all, thanks so much for waking up with us here. Thanks for listening to the podcast. You know the places to get it. You know the email address to reach out to the show with your questions. And he also was nice enough to stick around and do the Renegade Express with us. So you're going to have some Q&A with Mr. Ryan Clark as well, speaking of which. So I'm not going to go through our usual spiel here this morning because I know we've only got so much time. But I will say thank you, as always, to our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central and Township, all there in the heart of College Town. They're the gear that makes this go, and we always do appreciate that. So the game is now officially at noon, Drew. I think we all kind of saw that one coming. I think it's good for everybody that, listen, if you're in South Florida and you've got to evacuate and you still wanted to stop by the game before you went, now you have time to do so. I do think the only real complication here is if that hurricane still hits the East Coast, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty if people should travel back or not, and especially in Jacksonville and Orlando and place in Daytona and places more towards North and Central Florida. Because I think the folks in South Florida, I mean, there's a mandatory evacuation for a reason. So I think logistically that's going to raise a little bit of a question. But outside of that, you couldn't play that game when it was. It's smart for them to move it here. It's a win-win for everybody because, well, you still get to play this game. You don't move it. You still keep it at Doak Campbell. Florida State gets to keep that revenue. And, worst case or best case scenario, this thing turns, doesn't give Florida the worst, and you freed people up to watch a lot of good football. And worst case scenario, you've given people a head start to get out, seek shelter, and still be able to come to this football game, especially season ticket holders who've spent hard-earned money on this thing.
Right. There really wasn't a reason not to move this football game if it could be done. Obviously, both schools were okay with it because at the end of the day, if you probably could have played this football game at 7 p.m. and you probably would have been fine, but why not just eliminate all risk from it, move it up to noon? I don't think the storm is even remotely scheduled to hit anywhere near Tallahassee until Sunday-ish. So I believe even if Tallahassee does get some storms and rains, which I'm sure will have a thunderstorm or something from this hurricane, it wouldn't be till later anyways. But like I said, better safe than sorry. It gives people extra time who still want to come to the football game, like you said. There's no reason not to take the precautions just in case. I think it's a good move for both sides. And now we all get to watch the game at noon on Saturday.
And I think one of the things that's underrated in this that maybe hasn't been brought up a ton is all the emergency services it takes to run traffic and it takes to run security and things of that nature at a huge event like Florida State football that keeps TPD and even some LCSO out there off duty or not, whether they're paid off duty or not. The idea that you can use more officers now later in that day to maybe batten down the hatches, have more preparation going rather than still be directing traffic for a football game at midnight. I think you can't understate the importance of that.
Right. I think that's another thing that played into it largely, obviously, is the fact of manpower and where does that manpower need to be concentrated? Does it need to be at a football game or does it need to be elsewhere where a storm could potentially hit? Like I said, it's a good, smart precaution to take. I applaud both sides for being able to come to it. But it also kind of leads me up to this question for you. And I don't know if you were planning on getting to this. I'm sure you were. And no matter how you feel about the matter, I have to ask, all just strictly looking at it from a football standpoint, is Miami canceling their football game a positive or a negative for Florida State?
It's funny. We actually got asked that question in Renegade Express. So we're going to Ryan Clark and I already answered that question, but I think at the end of the day, the idea that their young new quarterback has one less game to break in, and Miami did not know this in advance, so they spent all week preparing for a road game instead of maybe looking a little bit more towards Florida State. I think you have to say it plays into FSU's hands a little bit.
Right, and let's all just make that perfectly clear. We are not, in no way am I insinuating that was some tactical move by Miami.
No.
They did what was best for their program. Like I said, no matter which way you want to feel about it, it's all about keeping kids safe and their families safe at the end of the day. So they did what they felt was best. It's just, might as well look at it from a football standpoint now that we know everyone is going to be safe.
I'm not always the biggest Tim Reynolds fan, but I did think he pointed out something funny on Twitter yesterday. He's like, 24 hours ago, the internet was applauding Miami for going out and scheduling Alabama, and now today they're too scared to play Arkansas State. Sure, believe whatever you want. I think that's pretty funny. All right, folks, we got only a little bit of time. We got to breeze through this and get you caught up. This is Why You Were Sleeping.
Hello. Good morning. Wake up. Wake up. Wake me up. Good morning. Good morning.
What happened last night?
All right, rapid fire. Let's do this. Royals beat the Tigers 13-2. Reds over the Brewers 7-1 in Cincinnati. Twins beat the Rays 10-6 at Tampa. 12-8 in Atlanta. That's the Rangers over the Braves in game one of a doubleheader. 3-1. The A's beat the Angels in Oakland. Yankees-Orioles was postponed yesterday. Cubbies beat the Pirates at PNC 1-0. Red Sox over the Blue Jays 6-1 in Fenway. 6-3 at Citi Field. That's the Mets over the Phillies. 8-1. The Nats over the Marlins in Miami. Game two of that doubleheader belonged to the Atlanta Braves 5-4. Cleveland defeats the White Sox 5-1 in Chicago. 11-3. That's the Giants beating the Rockies in Colorado. And finally, the Astros win 5-3 over the Mariners in Seattle. When we come back, extended conversation with Ryan Clark right after this on Wake Up War Chant 97.9 ESPN Radio. Welcome back to Wake Up War Chant here on 97.9 ESPN Radio, brought to you by your friends at For the Table. There's an interesting story hitting warchant.com today, and our own Ryan Clark, of course, the lead beat writer for warchant.com, wrote it. Going to bring him on here in a second, but first of all, just a little bit of background. Ryan, you did cover James Blackman a little bit when you were still down in South Florida, correct?
Yeah, I mean, right when I left, he was about to become a sophomore, and I just remember talking to people who were like, you might want to pay attention to this kid. He could be the next superstar to come from Belgrade. And it's like, okay. And then when you hear FSU is looking at him, you're like, huh, good to know. And then after what happened Saturday, it's like, well, guess I'm going to Belgrade.
Yeah, so Ryan's spilling the beans as we're recording this on Wednesday night. Ryan is in Belgrade, Florida. There's a piece, like I said, coming out on warchant.com today. Who all did you get to talk to, Ryan, about James?
A lot of different people. I got a chance to talk to his uncle, who's also his legal guardian and godfather, the assistant athletic director at Glade Central High School, two opposing high school football coaches who coached against James, his private quarterback coach, and Mike Farrell from Rivals.com. So it's a good collection of people.
I'm interested because we got to get Michael Langston's take on Monday. I'm interested from another recruit. What really did Mike Farrell say really jumped out at him when he got a chance to see this guy? Of course, coming out of a kind of bump and shoot offense in high school.
Well, I mean, for Mike, what he said what it was it was an arm strength that stood out, and also just his ability to see and survey the field, which is something that you hear a lot of people say. But it was also, I think, just kind of the throws he was able to make. I mean, just kind of, sifting here, going through my notes, he's like, he was someone that he became, a very polished passer as time went along. And, he's like, there are things you saw in camp settings that really stood out and all that. And so, yeah, I mean, not only that, but, he's a good athlete. And, he said, look, there's a lot of things that, they saw that more or less stood out.
What's one thing that you didn't expect to hear when you went down there about James Blackman that in talking to folks you kind of figured out?
There's one really good story, but I'm not going to tell you because I want to say that for people actually reading it. Shameless self-promotion. I would say probably just kind of how he has this really even-keeled attitude and mentality and approach towards everything. Belgrade's a place where from 2000 to 2010, the program went 126-19, but they went through 4 coaches because they only won 2 state titles. And this is a place where, administrators have told coaches, get a ride into school on Friday because if you drive your own car and you lose, it's going to get vandalized by the time you get back. And he dealt with that pressure as if it was nothing. They're like, he'd get upset after a loss, which is what you'd expect. But they're like, he never let it get to his head. He just always kind of saw it as like, oh, hey, I'm James, and I play quarterback. Well, not even that, but they were just like, he just looked at it as he was a regular teenage kid. And, whether you were someone who, was popular or not or whatever, he just treated everybody the same.
And, I think that's really why you end up with this true freshman as a starting quarterback, and that he's had the pressure. He's had to make those big throws, and he's been pushed into those big moments and those big expectations before. Obviously, there are going to be a lot more eyes on him on Saturday than there's ever been, but the idea that a lot of these kids in certain places in Florida and in certain places in Texas and even certain places in California and Georgia where, sure, it's a smaller stage, sure, it's a smaller town, but every eye is on them, and everybody, is expecting them to perform. It's amazing to me sometimes how those guys can be more ready to go just because of the mental rigors of high school football for them compared to some other folks.
Yeah, it can, but at the same time, it can also backfire because I think if you're used to this immense attention, it can get to your head and it can make you think, you're better than what you are, and it can lead to an eventual collapse and further down a rabbit hole. And the next thing you know, you kind of wondered how you got there. But, I think the thing to keep in mind is, when you get kids from these sort of programs, and obviously comparing what you go through in high school, it's nothing to college, but at least it's the base and it's the foundation. His background, I think, is very different than, let's say, that of Tavares McFadden. And what I mean by that is, yes, McFadden was a 5-star who went to all these camps, was a national recruit, but at American Heritage Plantation, where, no offense to anyone listening, they don't draw crowds for football. They don't. They might get some decent crowds, but they're never going to sell that place out. Whereas, Belgrade, whereas Glade Central's playing a home game, they're not going to see 10,000 people at a game. If they're playing Pahokee, don't be shocked if 20,000 people are at a game. And that's not common in South Florida. It's the exception to the rule. And so to have a kid who's kind of used to all that, I think it helps kind of smooth in the transition period.
Overall, Jimbo Fisher said on his call-in show last night, Ryan, when he was talking about James Blackman, that he knew during camp he was going to be the number 2 guy. We'd heard some reports. We'd heard that may be the case. But the folks you got to talk to down there, how surprised were they that he ends up being the number 2 guy, even if DeAndre Francois is healthy? He was his backup.
Not at all, because the consistent thing you kept hearing from people was just, it's what he can do with a football. I think Willie Bueno, who he's the head coach at Royal Palm Beach, he actually coached at Glade Central and was one of the 4 coaches who got let go between 2010 and 2010. He put it like this. He said, we played against him for 2 years, but obviously the thing that stands out is throwing. So he's probably the best guy we saw in the last 2 years in terms of overall ability to throw football. What stood out was his ability to make every throw. You don't come across that. Excuse me. He said you don't come across that too much. He said, sorry, folks, sorry, my throat. He said Blackman was, so tall and so long, he could seem to make every throw. And he's like, not only that, but he's like, there are things that he could do that the last time he saw a quarterback who could do that was Jacoby Brissett. And, of course, he played at NC State. And he started at Dwyer High School down there in Palm Beach County. But he's like, there are things that your defense can get away with going against most high school quarterbacks. He was like, we cannot get away with anything with James Blackman. They're like, we absolutely just had to be on our perfect and be in our best condition. So it was that. It was just how the accuracy was so good and so well above what you see with a regular high school kid that you had to plan and prepare for it.
All right, enough of my questions, Ryan. Let's go ahead and get to some listener and some tribal council questions here. Time to hit the Renegade Express. And first of all, I wanted to get to a Twitter question from Edward Kennedy, our friend Tomahawk Chop, yes, with 2 zeros. Clever. I like it. Edward wants to know, does the Miami versus Arkansas State cancellation have a plus or a negative impact on FSU's game with Miami the following week? And, well, I think if you're looking at it from a strict non-logistics, the reason why the game was canceled perspective, if you're looking at it from a straight-up football point, Ryan, I would argue that the point there is, if anything, Miami had to prepare for a road game. I would imagine Miami actually did some preparation, especially considering Arkansas State took Nebraska to the wire at times last week. Traveling, going on the road, that's a week that they could have had to prepare for Florida State. And that's a week where they could have had maybe an easier home game to roll with. And now they've prepared this whole week for a game they're not going to play. While Florida State, sure, they're facing their own troubles, but they're going to have a home game. They're going to be a little bit more comfortable, and they're going to get their freshman quarterback a little bit more experience, where Miami isn't.
Well, I think the thing is this. I think with Miami, you could argue it's a little bit of a benefit because, for one, you could kind of treat it as maybe another week of preseason in the sense of, like, you're able to practice and do things. And, yes, you're not getting the game, but you're at least able to fine-tune things. And two, I think, as we've all seen, injuries can happen early in the season. And if you can avoid something like that, if you're Miami, it's a benefit. Sure, you missed out on a game, but I think back to last year with Charleston Southern with FSU. Sure, FSU needed those reps, but it came at the cost of losing Derwin James for a whole year. And I think if you're any team, Miami, whoever, while you won a game, you do want people to be healthy. And plus, given that it's Florida State and it's a rivalry game, I don't think it's really going to take much for those guys to stay focused.
Yeah, everybody's going to be locked in for that one. I just think maybe getting a few more actual in-game reps would have helped Miami and that young offense. Other questions we got here. Helmet Nuts from the Tribal Council wants to know, what happened to the swing pass / screen passes Saturday, which is normally kind of a fixture in FSU's offense? If I had to venture a guess, I would say, to a certain extent, screens, swings, they can be seen as an extension of the running game. And as good as Alabama is against the run, maybe it's Jimbo Fisher trying to catch folks off guard, because let's face it, he was a lot more aggressive against Alabama than we usually see him, especially early on in football games.
He was more aggressive, but I also think that, like you said, too, the tone of the game changed. Because, you think about when he broke out swing passes, again, using last year's Miami game as an example, like, it came at a time where you're trying to catch a team off guard and guessing. And they never really had that sort of situation with Alabama in the second half. Where, yes, you're trying to find something that works, but at the same time, it's not like Alabama is really being aggressive. It's like they're the ones forcing Florida State into being the aggressor. And so I think that's probably why you don't see it. Because we've heard Fisher say that Akers can catch the ball out of the backfield, same thing with Patrick, or Stool can. So, you have players who can do it, but I think it's just a matter of where that play fit within the scheme of the game in the second half.
EDJER54 wants to know, no armchair quarterbacking here, and perhaps I missed it, but how often did we use 2 tight end or 2 running back sets in the Alabama game? I don't recall seeing a fullback in there often as well. It did seem like it was a lot of 1 tight against Alabama.
Yeah, it was. And, I mean, it's interesting to kind of, I guess, sit there and look at, why that was. Like, you understand why they don't go to split back, because, again, we talked about it. Alabama's run defense, it is the best in the nation. I mean, FSU only got 40 yards. So it's also, again, too, not to be a broken record, but by the time the second half came around, the further you went, the more that they had to play an aggressive style. So I think that's part of it. And also, let's say you do go with a 2 tight end set, then I think you have to, ask the question of, for you, what gives you greater value? Is it having a second tight end, or is it having a third receiver? And in this case, it would have been Keith Gavin. And we saw the game Gavin had, which, take away what happened on special teams. He had a good performance, I think it's safe to say, or a decent one at the very least, receiving. So that's probably, I think, maybe one reason why.
And, I think they kind of had to go away a little bit from that game plan. And I know Irish Chaffel had similar thoughts on the War Chant report, which you can either see should be coming out today. It's the idea, and we even got a question. NJ Knowles wanted to know, why was there no use of Rasul's speed? Why wasn't Saunders used to create mismatches? I think it's just the idea that some of those special teams blunders put them behind the 8 ball when they didn't expect to be, and they maybe had to be a little bit more aggressive in airing it out than they wanted to be. I think it all kind of comes back to the common theme that Florida State was put in a position that they didn't exactly expect to be in.
No, and I mean, look, it's not saying that teams don't plan on being behind the 8 ball, but at the same time, I don't think there's anyone that ever sits there and practices, hey, what do you do in a situation where, you have a punt that's blocked, you have a return game that, you can't really muster anything. And then also when you're having other miscues on special teams too. And yes, you practice field position, but I think it's one thing to practice field position in a controlled setting versus, you're practicing field position where everything is live. And not only that, but, you're talking about an offense where we've heard Fisher say, if one piece is off, everything falls apart.
All right, we got to put a hold on this conversation. More with Ryan Clark right after this on Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio.
Yes, Florida State just landed a 5-star commitment.
I don't see that anywhere online. How did you get that news so fast?
I'm on the new warchant.com app. I get news updates and scores pushed to my phone instantly.
How much does it cost?
It's free. Just go to iTunes or the Google Play Store, type in Warchant, and install it on your phone. That's it.
A free app that keeps me constantly up to date on Florida State sports and recruiting? Wow, that makes it incredibly easy to follow my Seminoles and never miss out.
With the app, you'll also get quick access to all the stories and features on Warchant, including the ever-popular message boards that feature thousands of fans talking about the Noles.
Warchant.com, your ultimate Seminole source.
I'm sat alone in a boggy marsh, totally motionless except for her heart. Mud flowed up into Lump's pajamas. She totally confused all the passing piranhas. She's lump.
All right, let's continue our conversation with Ryan Clark here on Wake Up War Chant, brought to you by your friends at For the Table. Lazaro9399 wants to know, am I a delusional homer to think that Blackman can do enough with the talent around him on offense and our stout defense to lead us to an ACC title? I don't think it's that far off. I think that Clemson game becomes super important, but if that defense looks as good as it did against the number 1 team in the nation at Clemson, if it looks like that against Louisville, who still apparently has some pretty important offensive line questions to answer, I don't see why Florida State can't be in the mix for this thing. Are they going to be dominant? Are they going to light up the scoreboard every week? You would think not with a true freshman quarterback. But I think that defense is good enough, and as long as Blackman does more to help you win than lose, and I know that kind of sounds like a madnism, but the idea that you can't let freshman mistakes beat you. If he does it, and when he does it, it's minimized by the defense, and like he said, the good skill players around him. I don't see why Florida State can't still be in the running for that.
I think they're still in the running, and I think as it pertains to Blackman, we've seen first-year starting quarterbacks do really well. I mean, look at what Jalen Hurts did last season in Alabama. So I mean, look, I think these first-year guys can come in, they can do well, they can perform being true freshmen. I think the other thing to kind of keep in mind too is this: like, you are talking about a team that, while its offense has some things to work out, its defense is very much a strength. And we've seen teams just win games on defense. I mean, not to be funny, but like, it's what the SEC became really good at, is just teams built on really strong defenses and offenses that, how do I put this? Like, I think in one way, like, yes, they were crippled by the fact that the defenses were so good, but on the other side, it's like, well, if you can build a really good defense, all you need is an offense that can do just enough to help you win. And I mean, obviously, FSU's offense is well beyond being one of those just enough offenses. But look, I mean, I think they have everything needed to do well, go far, and they're still very much alive in the future.
I've said it like a broken record this week. How many times in the late 2000s and early 2010s did you hear us talk about those LSU teams and saying, man, that offense is terrible. Man, they just can't score points. And yet there they were, continually in the top 5, continually pressing to win what was at the time the toughest division in football, and continually pressing for a national championship. And here's the thing. Here's a secret. FSU's offense is going to be better than those LSU offenses. They're going to be better than those teams that literally it was like squeezing blood from a turnip. I think FSU is more than in this race. Once again, as long as freshman mistakes don't beat you, and when they happen, you overcome them. Cap TD 63 wants to know, it looks like Patrick hit the hole slow. If this continues, will Cam Akers get more touches and the other running backs move ahead of Patrick on the depth chart? I'll say this. I don't think you're going to see a team as speedy as Alabama for the rest of the year. There's no doubt about it. That defense, especially seeing the speed of Alabama just in general, Ryan, before we even tackle that question, with your own 2 eyes, it was so impressive to me just to see how they would keep their feet moving, how they would plunge forward, and even on offense, how those running backs, when they're dead to rights, when they should have lost 1 or lost 2, would just keep it churning, and they'd gain 1 or 2 yards out of something that should have went nowhere. Really, when you finally see it with your own 2 eyes, it really, truly is impressive.
Well, I mean, as far as, I guess, I think that answering the question itself, I mean, I don't think you're going to see a variation of a change in anything, at least to start, because, I mean, look, Fisher just seemed like he was just really... I think he was kind of surprisingly accepting of just, what happened with the running backs. And he said, look, I thought the running backs played well. Yes, like there were some things that happened that kind of kept them from breaking off bigger games than what they achieved. But he sounded and seemed really pleased. And, the feeling I think all this kind of took from listening to him was just anyone worrying about Jaquez Patrick losing his job. I mean, that's so premature. But then again, I also remember seeing someone tweet at me on social, he needs to bench DeAndre Francois. So take that one for what it's worth.
I do think, and I got asked this question similar on Jacksonville radio on Monday this week, and I do think it's possible that, especially if Cam Akers emerges into the star that they think he can be, that maybe it doesn't become Jaquez Patrick as the feature back. Everybody gets their touches, but he's more the main guy. I think you could see them by the end of the year, if he continues to develop, on more of an even footing. I don't know if he completely overtakes him, but I could see them by the end of the year maybe a little bit more even in carries than what they are now.
I think that's possible, but I also think the thing, too, is, we both know that Jimbo is loyal to guys who've been loyal to him. And, he's been with Jaquez Patrick technically since Patrick was 14, and they were the first school to offer him, and I think things like that, building that relationship, that plays a role, I think, in how you go about developing a kid and using him within your scheme. And then it's not to say that he likes Patrick more than Cam Akers, but I think it is to say that he knows what Patrick is capable of doing. So I mean, if that gets to that point, I mean, it's probably because you saw so much from Cam Akers, you can't help but use him, but. Again, I think that he's going to give Jaquez Patrick all the shots he can get to make a difference on that offense.
All right, our friend Stone emailed us at radio@warchant.com. He's been emailing us every week. After watching the defense in a game, who do you think is the best player at all 3 levels of the defense? But he's given us a nice little caveat. You have to exclude James, Thomas, and Sweat. So it gets a lot tougher after that.
Not really. I mean, let me take that one. I think in terms of the first level, I still say it's Derek Nottie. I mean, the strength that he has and what he can do on the interior, especially stopping the run. I mean, it's impressive. So I would say him. Second level is Jacob Pugh. I mean, I think when we talk about this defense, it's hard not to think of him as one of the first guys. I mean, yes, there's a lot of star power and that splash the name, but like, he's so versatile in what he can do. And in that third level, it's easy to say Tavares McFadden, but when you look at that first half and that touchdown, you kind of wonder, would that have been different if you have Trey Marshall in the game? And so I think it would be Trey Marshall in terms of the third level. I mean, yes, I think McFadden's the low-hanging fruit, but taking him out of the equation, I think it's Trey Marshall.
And it also goes into your idea of what's the definition of the best player. Is it your most important player? Is it the most impressive individually at what he does? Or is it the cog in the machine that keeps the thing working? He also asked the same question on the offense. And who's the best lineman, who's the best receiver, and who's the best running back? Best lineman, I think, would have to be Landon Dickerson. He proved himself all throughout last year. I'll say this, though. As much flack as I've given him, as much flack as some of the press and some of the fans have given him, Alec Eberle played one heck of a game on Saturday, and we have not had a chance to touch on that.
Fisher said he was their best player, and I think there's something to be said for that. I mean, like, look, it's interesting that we never heard about the hits last season, and looking back, I'm not surprised because it seems like Eberle's not the type to make excuses. And I think as we've all learned with Fisher and Matthew Thomas, he's definitely a player's coach and he's never going to dog his guys. And so, yeah, I mean, Eberle has looked healthy and he's looked good. And I think that's the thing about this line is like, I look at last year's line and you go, okay, aside from guys like Rod Johnson, Kareem R, and Eberle, I mean, granted, that's three. It's like you knew about them, but you didn't know about them. Whereas with like this year's line, it's like we know how good Derek Kelly has been in camp because no one shuts up about it. We know how good Landon Dickerson can be because no one shuts up about it. We know how healthy Eberle's been because guess what? No one shuts up about it. And the same thing applies to Cole Minshew, and the same thing applies to Rick Leonard. And that's just, it's such a different tone compared to what we've heard the last 2 years.
Receiver-wise, he wants to know receiver and running back in that equation as well. Receiver-wise, I'd say you have to go with Auden Tate. It's so clear that he's the most polished guy right now on the offense. He's the most mature guy. The fact that he went up and mossed Minkah Fitzpatrick to get a touchdown pass, I mean, that's one of the best corners in college football. You just did that too. Right now, Auden Tate kind of seems to be the guy. I mean, Nyquan Murray could end up making an argument for this. Keith Gavin could end up making an argument for this. But until Gavin maybe matures a little bit in all facets of his game, and until Murray kind of seems a little bit more disciplined in playing the style of ball he needs to play, it's got to be Auden Tate.
Yeah, I agree with that. So, I mean, I'm not trying to be funny, but, like, let's move on. So it would be, our next one would be what, running back?
Running back, exactly. I
think that's kind of an easy one.
Go for it.
I mean, you have to say Cam Akers, and again, it's something against Patrick, but I mean, he had 4 carries, and I mean, he only had 4 yards, but I mean, he had to fight for it. Whereas if I look at Akers, and whenever he came in, it was just something different. There was pizzazz to it, and you just kind of thought, okay, maybe he could break it. And again, I think that's just kind of the trap of this season when you look at running back. I think the good thing about these guys is hopefully people are saying, oh, well, Dalvin would have done this. Because, I mean, they're not Dalvin. They're very different. But I also think that the thing with them, too, is if Akers does something Patrick doesn't, people are going to talk about it. If Patrick does something Akers doesn't do, then they're going to talk about it. It's just going to be fun to watch these two because it's going to be this who can do what kind of one-upsmanship that, again, it's just the word I think of is entertaining.
I'm willing to still reserve a little bit more judgment on Patrick, and again, that just was not the matchup. I do think Jimbo Fisher should have went to Cam Akers more in that game, but I just think maybe that's not the matchup for that guy. He's a more powerful runner. He's going to make guys pay. He's going to make teams that are not as fast as Alabama pay with the type of style he has. I just don't think he was quite the running back for that game, but I do agree with the point that Cam Akers definitely should have gotten more carries in that football game.
That's fair. I mean, yeah, like I think with Patrick, it's going to be one of those things where, in a sense, I think people are going to look at him as he's the one under a microscope because I think so many people just want to make Cam Akers the first team back and the anointed. But again, it's like technically this is accurate, but until game 1 against Alabama, every time Jaquez Patrick started, he rushed for what? I think over 100 yards in each start is the stat Fisher claims. But, like, again, those are only a handful of starts for FSU. So, yeah, I mean, like, he's a guy that there's a lot of hope for him, a lot of potential. You know, he's been someone that I think Fisher's been really happy with. And we've heard guys talk about his contributions. But, yeah, I mean, it's just funny how after one game, it's are we really having this conversation, which I think we're going to have this conversation the whole year. So then again, why not have it after one game?
No, Mike is the only guy left with a question in the Tribal Council. It's a very specific question towards Gene. So Gene is on tomorrow's program, Mike. I promise you I will ask him that then. Finally, before we go, last week we got a really good question from Chopacane. I'd say, I don't want to say off topic because it's still a Florida State question, but not quite as X and OZ. So I did want to ask before we go, because it didn't get in under the wire last week. Ryan, you've been covering the Noles for 3 years now, and I don't know if he means football specifically or any sport, period, but I will ask this for you now. Any sport is what I'll call it. Your favorite FSU uniform?
Don't have one.
Oh, come on.
No, I really don't have one. Like, I really just don't have one.
You're not a uniform guy?
I mean, I am, but I mean, it's just kind of like, I don't know if I would say, like, favorite, but I'll say this. I think the new ones look better than the old ones. I mean, I'll definitely say that, because I think the cool thing about the new ones is it's the design on the shoulder pads. Like, it's the way the lettering and the numbering looks. Like, to me, like, that just looks, like, so, like, sharp and clean and modern. And, like, it has that look that you would want for FSU. Because, like, whenever they show footage of, like, you know, the championship game and they're wearing those uniforms, it just, to sound like HGTV, it looked really dated. So, again, it's not necessarily a favorite thing, but it's like the new uniforms they have are just, they're a lot nicer, more contemporary look, whereas the old ones just, again, it looked like Peter Warwick was still out there.
I'll say this, because I love them both. And it's funny you bring up the sleeves, because I kind of feel like that's the one thing that everybody has a very, very hard opinion one way or the other on. People either love that patchwork or they can't stand that patchwork. But I think it's the most natural evolution of what was going on when you look at the tribal pattern on the collar of the older uniforms compared to the actual patchwork that's on the sleeves and that's on the collar now. I do think the one thing that really kind of bugs me about the football uniform still is I don't like the gold numbers. It needs to go back to white numbers with a gold trim. But my favorite uniform, and I think you know what I'm going to say, because I've always loved them. There's something about
turquoise uniform. I'm joking.
No, burn them with fire. Sunday Golds at Hauser. There's something so cool. There's something so special about. I don't feel like Florida State has a uniform, and Florida State has iconic uniforms. I'm not trying to say this in a disparaging way to any of the uniform. I mean, the spear on the helmet's cool. The patchwork's cool. Even the older style patchwork, even if it's not your favorite, I loved it. I think there's something about when Florida State is wearing those gold baseball uniforms that almost mentally you just kind of think, yeah, they're going to win this game. And I know part of that's just because they win a lot on Sunday. Florida State's really good at winning rubber matches. But the fact that when they have those on, they so rarely lose, and they just look really sharp. That's why they're my favorite.
So let me ask you this question. In terms of college teams all time, what's your favorite uniform?
Ooh.
Excluding FSU.
For Florida State's definitely up there. I mean, and I know I'm a smidge biased, but at the same time, I mean, the spear always looks sharp. The current Florida State's never had, outside of the Nike Pro Combats, has never had a bad look. Florida State's current look is good. The look before this was really good. The early 90s look was good. The Bill Peterson era with the state logo helmets was good. Outside of a very few notable exceptions that Florida State only wore for a couple seasons, maybe in the early 70s or stuff like that, it's all good. But right now, if I had to pick a current college football uniform that I just love to death, I love the North Carolina uniforms. I love the Argyle touches. I love it on the sleeves. I love the collar. It's good to me. I like it.
Okay, I can live with that one.
What about you? I'll turn the tables on that.
Does the Tennessee trash can count?
Oh, shut up. Is that not the most ridiculous thing Butch has ever done? A dang trash can on the sideline.
I'll be honest. I think if we cover Tennessee, that's a radio segment with unto itself. What are the 5 most ridiculous things Butch has done? Because I think that's a pretty long and heavy list. I would say that in terms of uniforms, I mean, I like anything Oregon does because I think, again, it's just they've set the standard.
But it's very clear listening to you that you really like more modern designs.
Well, but that's what I was just about to say. But, the answer I'll give for this one, to me, is Minnesota. And the reason I go with Minnesota is because I love that kind of traditional block M. And, like, for me, and this is going to sound, like, really dumb, but, like, my wife is from Minnesota. I have family from Minnesota. And, like, to me, it's like that uniform looks so classic that it feels like it's like watching Minnesota games in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, even back in the day. And, I mean, like, I don't know, every time I see that uniform, and this is where you're going to make fun of me for eternity, like the theme from this show, Coach, comes into my head. I'm ready to coach fictional Minnesota. Well, Minnesota State is real, but I'm going to stop this really stupid Minnesota conversation. But the point is I think of that theme song and just Minnesota and lakes and cabins and gophers and, the obsession with Joe Mauer being the greatest human being who ever lived.
My runner-up is Michigan, by the way, and SC not far behind. If I have a top 3, those are my top 3. Anyway, Ryan, we've talked for a long time, my friend. Thanks so much for joining me. I always appreciate you coming on talking. Thanks for answering some listener questions.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, we're going to put a bow on this one right after this on Wake Up War Chant 97.9 ESPN Radio. To Ryan Clark for joining us as we put a bow on here. Wake Up War Chant 97.9 ESPN Radio. The NFL returns this evening. New England and Kansas City going to end up playing that game. Is it just me, or is this kind of an underwhelming kickoff match? I know New England's not playing a bad team, but New England's playing a very, I don't know. I get it. I get there's good players on Kansas City, but I guess it's just the Alex Smith, the meh factor to it. Is there any doubt that New England's going to win this game, like, at all, period?
No.
Yeah. I mean, it's that simple. New England's going to crush this team. I mean, I think it'll be an entertaining back-and-forth affair for maybe a little bit. And it's the NFL. I'm not saying New England's going to blow them out. But I don't know. I just feel like there could have been a better kickoff game. But, there are not many better places to watch it than over at College Town with your friends at Madison Social, Central and Township, all part of For the Table. Best happy hour in town tonight. So go on, get yourself a little brew, and then after that's done, go watch yourself some football. There's nothing wrong with that, ladies and gentlemen. Drew, thank you for bearing with me, sir. It is much appreciated. Thanks to you guys for listening. Of course, thanks for Ryan Clark joining the show like he did today. Mike and Mike is up next here on 97.9 ESPN Radio.